Okay, so in this presentation, it's a really short one. We're just going to talk about generally how to detect and avoid fallacies, and this is just to wrap up our discussion on informal fallacies. Um, so let's get to it. First, it's important to think about what are reasons people commit fallacies. This is good to know because if you come across a fallacy, it's good to know why it was committed and what can be done to avoid it in the future. So sometimes people deliberately commit fallacies in order to benefit from convincing us of their argument. This is really common in ads in politics. So if you know it's deliberate, then you know to be super cautious about advertisements and political flyers or political speeches, because often fallacies are used to convince people where logic might be difficult to. Sometimes people commit fallacies because of poor critical thinking skills or mental laziness. So instead of having to go into a long explanation for why somebody thinks something, they might just commit a fallacy, some emotional fallacy, play on someone's emotions or something, just because it's easier and easier than giving the entire explanation, right? You can imagine even a parent, for example, saying, a kid saying, "Why do I have to do this?" And the parents just says, "Because I said so," right? That's appeal to authority fallacy. That's not a good reason why. It's almost an appeal to force, also. Or if you ask me again, I'm going to send you to your room, appeal to force. It's just easier to do that than give all the explanations. So, again, it's good to know why someone is doing that and realize, like, oh, okay, so they're not actually giving an argument. Maybe they don't have these skills or sort of mentally lazy, and so maybe ask in a different way, or maybe catch them when they're in a better mood and can give a better explanation. But it's also good to understand that this could be a reason. It's also good to understand this so that you also don't fall into this trap, and instead of resorting to a fallacy, you could just say, let me think about the reasons, or maybe I'll tell you the reasons later, or something like that, right? Instead of falling into a fallacy. Fallacies definitely can occur when people are caught up with their emotions. This is not to say emotions are bad. In fact, emotions can be a really good part of making logical and ethical decisions. Sometimes it's a good check. But if you're overly caught up with really, really strong emotions, then it can also interfere with critical thinking skills and rational thought. So that's another reason why sometimes you or other people could commit fallacies. And then sometimes our own worldview can affect, can our worldview, meaning our beliefs, attitudes, values, assumptions, all these can impact how we create and evaluate arguments. And so our own experience will tell us or influence us in how we see information, how we take that in, how we analyze it. And that can lead us to uh, perhaps engage in fallacies or be convinced of fallacies. So, for example, a culture that, or a worldview that puts a or high value on authority figures may be more susceptible to the appeal to authority um, fallacy, for example. So, people's worldview can also affect this. Some, basic suggestions for trying to avoid fallacies. One, pay close attention to the argument, obviously. Um, and hopefully you've been doing that where you see an argument and you look at what are the premises, what are the conclusion, what's the connection between those two, and check to see that the evidence is actually supporting the conclusion. Be cautious if you see an argument that's using really emotionally charged language. And we had practice looking at thinking about emotionally charged language versus neutral language. So if you do come across an argument that seems overly emotional, just be aware that there could be a fallacy somewhere in there. Be aware of your own worldview so that you also are not committing these fallacies based on your own sort of preconceived notions, biases, values. And again, if you see an argument, you hear one, and something is telling you that it's not right, and you're not quite sure why, if sort of something in your gut, that's what this image is over on the bottom right, or the gut saying, "Hey, I have a strong opinion about that." So if there is something telling you it's not right, then it doesn't necessarily mean that the argument is wrong or fallacious, but it's a good idea to maybe pause and evaluate it a little bit deeper and see if there is indeed a fallacy. So that wraps up this sort of overview of all the various informal fallacies. Um, I know it was a lot of work and a lot of listening to me. And of course, under other circumstances, I wish we could have been discussing this and doing activities in person. Um, but it is what it is. So, what you're going to be doing in this assignment is a quick quiz. It's a 9-question quiz, and there's no time limit. And essentially, there will be a bunch of phrases or passages, paragraphs that's either committing a fallacy or not. And so your job will be to no, actually they're all engaged in some sort of fallacy. And so you're going to have to identify which fallacy. So what I would recommend is what I'm going to do is in this video or in this assignment, I'm going to give you a link to the full presentation that has all the different fallacies. And what I would suggest is as you're taking the quiz, you can keep that presentation open and try to use that as a sort of a guide to help you identify which fallacy is being committed in each problem. Okay, so take your time with it. And try to be careful in answering. I'm just going to give you one chance for this one because I really want you to pay attention and really do your best in trying to identify the various fallacies. All right. Let me know if you have any questions or